News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
You're with GB News. I'm Polly Middlehurst with your latest top stories. Downing Street says an MP who claims she was sacked because of her Muslimness was invited to make a formal complaint but failed to do so. Nusrat Ghani lost her job as Transport Minister in 2020. The Prime Minister spoke to her after learning of the extremely serious allegation. In a statement, the MP says Boris Johnson wrote to her saying he couldn't get involved. But she only wanted to make the government take the matter seriously and investigate it properly. Here's what the Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab, had to say.
I believe actions, a claim like this, as serious as this, should, but it can only happen if the person making the complaint makes it formally. That's when the procedures kick in. And just to be clear about this, that advice was given to Nuz back in 2020.
Dominic Raab. Well, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Tom Tugendhat, says he's good friends with Miss Ghani and has no reason to doubt her claims.
I've always found her words to be true. So let's investigate this, because I think it's a very serious allegation. As you and I both know, we're stronger when we draw on the full talents of the team, and we're very lucky in the United Kingdom to have people from communities around the world, and that enriches our society and enriches our skills and our reach. So I hope very much this can be answered quickly, and if there is a question to answer, that it's dealt with immediately.
Tom Tugendhat. Well, in international news today, Britain has accused the Russian President, Vladimir Putin, of plotting to install a pro-Moscow leader as head of the government in Ukraine. In an unusual move, the Foreign Office named the former Ukrainian MP, Yevhen Murayev, as a potential pro-Kremlin candidate to take over in Kiev. The former head of the army, Lord Richard Dannatt, told GB News the West needs to work out what Putin's objective is.
We have to remember that scrape him to the core and you find an unreconstructed KGB colonel whose beloved Warsaw Pact and Soviet Union was destroyed by the cohesion of the West in 1989 when the Berlin Wall came down. And what he would like to achieve more than anything else is to sow discord and doubt amongst the minds of NATO members and break up that cohesion of NATO.
Lord Dannatt speaking earlier. A suspect accused of killing a British man with a sickle is being questioned by police in Thailand. 49-year-old Marcus Evans was found dead in his home with knife wounds. Another British man, who's 55, was injured while trying to stop the suspect. Police say an initial investigation found they were attacked for playing music too loudly in the early hours of Saturday morning. Here, the former Housing Secretary is calling for the national insurance hike, which he approved, to be postponed. Robert Jenrick says the government's responding to the cost of living crisis in a lamentably slowly way. He added, confronting harsh realities is part of alleviating the situation for low and middle income families. Joe Venture from the Taxpayers Alliance says the rise should be scrapped altogether.
This rise would be bad enough in and of itself, but when you think of the other things that taxpayers are going to be contending with this year, like surging energy prices and frozen personal allowance thresholds, I think you've really got a recipe for disaster. So, I think it's heartening that we're starting to see these concerns voiced by senior parliamentarians in the Conservative Party, but I do think Jenrick is actually being a bit too reserved on this point. He says this rise should be postponed, but it shouldn't be postponed in my mind. It should be scrapped altogether.
Belgian police have been firing tear gas and water cannon at protesters in Brussels. Thousands of people were marching through the capital to demonstrate against COVID vaccinations and restrictions before gathering outside the European Commission. The Prime Minister of Belgium, Alexandre De Croo, announced on Friday that booster jabs will be required by citizens to maintain COVID passes, giving people access then to bars or cinemas or other public areas. A British Iranian detained in Tehran has started a hunger strike over the lack of progress in securing his release. 67-year-old Anousheh Ashuri has been held in prison for more than 4 years, accused of spying for Israel. He denies the charges against him. You're watching GB News on TV, online and through your radio on DAB+. We'll have more news later.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking mostly dry but rather cloudy with some rain in the far northwest. Let's take a look at the details. The north coasts of Devon and Cornwall should see a few cloud breaks, but for most parts of southwest England, it will be a dry, albeit cloudy start to the evening. Southeast of England should also be generally dry at around 7 p.m, but here too it will be cloudy with light winds. There will be a better chance of some clear spells developing across parts of Wales, especially towards the north and west of the country. As we run eastwards back into the Midlands, the gaps in the cloud will tend to fill in, so any breaks will be restricted towards the west and northwest of the region. Slightly more in the way of a breeze is on the cards across the east of England, and this will help to break the cloud up a bit at times, giving some clear spells. Some damp and windy weather will affect the far north and west of Scotland, but further south and east a dry and breezy evening is likely with broken cloud cover. 1 or 2 cloud breaks are likely across Northern Ireland, particularly towards the north coast, but as elsewhere, the main theme will be a rather cloudy, predominantly dry one. Damp and windy weather will continue to affect the far northwest tonight. Elsewhere, it stays mostly dry and cloudy, with a slight frost forming under any clearer spells.
Well, good morning. You are watching GB News. On today's Political Correction, I'm joined by Arlene Foster and, of course, Paul Embry. Came out this morning, Conservative MP Nusrat Ghani says her Muslimness led to a demotion from her post as Transport Minister. We discuss Sue Gray's report, which is expected to be released this week, as it was last week. Is diplomacy with Russia possible? Strong words have been issued by Foreign Secretary Liz Truss as Putin turns up the pressure on the Ukrainian border. That plus plenty more after the news headline. So, what do we...
So the front page of the Sunday Times this morning can't be easy reading for the PM. The paper has an interview with the Conservative MP and former Minister Nusrat Ghani.
So she claims she was forced from her role at the Department of Transport due to, quotes, her Muslimness, making colleagues, quotes, uncomfortable.
The Chief Whip, Mark Spencer, of course, has denied the allegations from Ms Ghani, but her revelations are the latest in a relentless stream of suggestions of questionable behaviour of government whips. And, of course, Michael, you were a government whip at one time.
I was briefly a government whip.
Briefly.
My view, actually, is that on the whole, the whips are pussycats because they are, amongst other things, they are the HR, the Human Relations Department of the government. So they spend a lot of time communicating the worries of members of Parliament, whether personal or political, to the establishment, to the top. Of course, when it comes to a crucial vote, they get together and they apply all sorts of pressure to people to vote in the way that they should. Christian Wakeford, for example, says that he was threatened with the defunding of a school. By the way, it turns out that the school was funded in the end. That money has gone forward. But I can imagine that a whip would say to him, look, you are about to vote against a department because this was the matter of free school meals. You're about to vote against the policy of this department, but this department is offering money for a school in your constituency. Now, is that just, a reasonable point to make, or is it extraordinary pressure? On the whole, I think the members of Parliament, maybe the 2019ers, are being a bit snowflakish. When you think about it, they've been very happy to take money for their constituencies. If you follow their tweets, they're always talking about their new high street and how they put on pressure on the government, and the government has delivered all this stuff. So pork barrel politics is present, and what they're complaining about, perhaps, is when every now and again there is a threat to turn off the pork barrel. And let's just remember the stakes are pretty high, because what some of them apparently are doing is trying to bring Boris Johnson's political career to an end in a humiliating way. I think you would push back in those circumstances, wouldn't you?
Well, I mean, I'm worried about what seems to be a clear lack of moral fibre on the part of certain MPs. I mean, as you mentioned, Michael, you would expect members of Parliament who are making life and death decisions sometimes in the chamber in the way that they vote, and they have to have these debates about national affairs, etc. You'd like to think they've got a bit of backbone. You'd like to think that they're not snowflakes. You'd like to think that if a party whip came along and started applying a bit of pressure, that they would have the wit and the wherewithal to withstand that. So if there are MPs who are genuinely claiming to feel harassed or bullied because a party whip has applied a bit of pressure, which, let's be honest, that's the nature of politics, I think I'd probably question whether they are equipped to be in the House in the first place. I mean, all of this talk about the police becoming involved and William Ragg now meeting with the Metropolitan Police, I'm deeply uneasy about that. I don't think the police should be getting involved in what is really the day-to-day cut and thrust of politics.
And to be honest, I'm quite sure the police don't want to be involved in it either, because there are plenty of other things that they need to be involved in. I thought it was interesting, Nadine Dorries, who of course is a Boris loyalist, has tweeted today that she has been known to be the odd bit rebellious over this past 17 years as she's been an MP, and all she has faced from the Whip's office has been polite disappointment. So that's what she's saying today.
I think we ought to address the Nusrat Ghani accusation.
Oh, absolutely.
Obviously, this is a very important matter because it carries the implication that the Conservative Party is racist against Muslim people, which would be a very, very serious accusation. I'm not a member of the Conservative Party. I absolutely cannot speak for it. I would just say that I think I'm a little bit doubtful about this story. And maybe a couple of bits of evidence the other way around against the idea that the Conservative Party is institutionally racist. Nusrat Ghani is, after all, a Member of Parliament. She was selected as a Conservative for Wealden. Wealden is not a particularly Muslim place. I just looked it up, actually. In terms of colour, the population is 98.3% white. She was one of 21 Conservative Muslim candidates at the last election, of whom 4 were elected. You could say that's quite a small number, given the proportion of the population. And she was, of course, made a minister. But it's quite striking that the Chief Whip has taken the unusual step, not just of denying that he said it, but actually saying that the remarks were defamatory. So it looks like he is prepared to contest this. And, of course, it will, in the end, be one person's word against another.
And that's the point, Paul, isn't it?
Exactly, and the whole thing's very unedifying, actually, to have a Member of Parliament and one of the whips for the same party to be having this public spat. I mean, clearly, if a Member of Parliament makes an allegation of this seriousness, it has to be investigated. Clearly, it needs to be looked into. I mean, I have to say, I would find it incredible in this day and age if any politician, if any whip decided that it was appropriate to say, you're going to be edged out of your position because of your faith, because of your Muslimness. So I mean, you know, we can't rush to judgment on these things. Innocent until proven guilty. That's the approach I think we need to take. But I guess there's also the dimension, and you both would know about this. If somebody has lost their job, if somebody feels that they haven't been promoted in the way that their abilities demand, and they're disgruntled, is it ever likely, God forbid, that politicians, call me cynical, would make these sorts of allegations as some kind of revenge for feeling that they've been overlooked?
And of course, that's the problem. Sour grapes in politics is very much evident. But I think, Michael, the problem with this is that it feeds into that narrative that was first started by Theresa May about the nasty party. And of course, the media love that sort of caricature of the Conservative Party.
Yes, I mean, this is what is, I think, pretty disappointing about it, pretty upsetting.
Yeah.
If this happened to Nusrat Ghani, I say I doubt whether her recollection is exactly right. She's held it in for maybe the best part of 2 years.
Yeah.
And she's released it now at a time when it can be supremely damaging, which, of course, is not a good word about the state of the Conservative Party. What we've seen, I think, is that there must have been a whips operation. Of course, there has been, to shore up support. And we're seeing a reaction to it. At first, I thought William Ragg was being rather naive in going to the police. I now think he's being rather sophisticated, because, of course, he's scaring off the whips. I mean, taking it to the police, for Pete's sake. They're going to have to be very careful what they say in future. But that Nusrat Ghani would want to bring her whole party into terrible disrepute. It does say quite a lot about the state of the party. I was just thinking earlier on Paul's point about, I think you used the word snowflake about MPs. The people who were elected in the province, who are elected in the province, they have to be very tough cookies. I mean, they have to live with the idea that they're going to be attacked, that they may be assassinated. I mean, to be in politics, you have to be pretty tough, don't you?
Well, you do have to be pretty tough. Of course you do. And to Paul's point about, you know, the calibre of politicians who haven't the moral fibre to say, well, whatever you think, Mr. Whip, I'm doing X, Y, and Z. I mean, that is exactly what you have to do. The whips are doing their job. I mean, if we're going to have an investigation into this, we could probably have to go back to the Queen Elizabeth I court and have a look at what was going on then, or certainly go back to the Disraeli's time. I mean, this happens. Whips are doing their job. But have they overstepped the mark, I think, is the point.
Well, is it a sign of the times that we are a bit more now of a crybaby nation, that we do flaunt our emotions more than we used to? We don't really have that kind of stiff upper lip anymore. Has that filtered through to the upper echelons of public life, including Parliament? I mean, there's been quite a few examples over the last couple of years where MPs have broken down in the Commons when they've been recounting particular personal traumas or tragedies. That's becoming more and more frequent. Once upon a time, that sort of thing didn't happen. Now, some people might say, well, it's a good thing that MPs are showing themselves to be human. OK, I get that. But equally, do we want the chamber of the House of Commons to be almost like a kind of therapy workshop rather than the actual workshop of the nation, where we expect MPs to show a bit of resilience, to show a bit of backbone, and if they get a bit of stick, they take it on the chin. That's what I want from my members of Parliament, I have to say.
Spoken like a tough firefighter.
Correct.
Well, there you go.
But of course, there was other news this week with the defection of the Red Wall MP Christian Wakeford from the Conservatives to the Labour Party, and that has reopened the debate over whether an MP changing party should mandate a by-election.
Defections have occurred throughout British political history over issues from the Northern Ireland peace process to Brexit to the Iraq War. So, should there be a change in the rules surrounding elected officials who jump ship? Well, I rather think that if you're going to change party, you have been elected on a false premise and you probably should offer yourself up for re-election. It won't happen in this case because nobody wants it. The Conservatives don't want it because they'd probably lose.
Yes.
The Labour Party don't want it. It would so amuse me if it happened, because can you imagine the poor Labour Party workers in Bury South who spent years opposing this man, now solemnly going around the doors of their constituency, knocking on the doors and saying, vote for Christian Wakeford, he's the man, he's the one, he's the right person for Bury South. Can you just imagine it? Mayhem. So nobody wants this by-election, but I think ethically speaking, they ought to be prepared to offer themselves up.
Absolutely, it's a no-brainer for me. I mean, look, I'm very happy to welcome Comrade Wakeford to the Labour ranks. Why wouldn't I be? But
unlike Young Labour and Momentum, who were very distressed
they
by
really
it
have
all.
put up some resistance to it. But no, look, I mean, if the Labour Party is going to win an election, it's got to attract Tories with, in places like Bury South with the views of Christian Wakeford. But there's a point of principle here. When people go into the ballot box at general elections, they do not just vote for the name; they vote for the party affiliation largely. And the truth is that voters in Bury South did not elect a Labour MP. They elected a Conservative MP. I might not like that, but the reality is that they did. And consequently, I think Christian Wakeford and all MPs who defect should do the decent thing, resign their seats and fight a by-election on the ticket of their new party.
And of course, I have to incriminate myself here because I moved parties way back in 2003, and there'll be people in Northern Ireland looking at the TV going, you didn't stand for a by-election. But of course, under the rules in the Assembly, it's a multi-seat constituency. So if I had have resigned my seat, they would have went to the next person on the Ulster Unionist seat
list. You stick to that defence,
I will stick to that defence, and I think it's important that I do. So moving on then, it's expected that the findings from Sue Gray's investigation will be published by the end of this week, we hope, and the implications for the Prime Minister could be absolutely huge, but none of us knows what's going to be in this report. I think there are different takes on what the purpose of the report is. For me, she's trying to find out the facts of what happened, and then she'll bring that forward. Is that what you understand?
Yeah, I mean, I think her terms of reference are quite limited, aren't they? But from reports, she's a woman with integrity. She's a woman who's ruthless. She's a woman who will leave no stone unturned in pursuit of the facts. And I think the truth is, if Sue Gray comes to a view that Boris Johnson either ignored the guidance or the law personally or was complicit in allowing others to do that, then it's very difficult to see circumstances in which he can continue. I mean, I think most people will look at it and think we were living under the most rigid restrictions, and the vast majority of people followed those restrictions. I think a lot of those restrictions were nonsense. I think they were far too extreme. But nonetheless, they were in place at the time, and you cannot have a situation where the people who are making the rules ignore those rules with abandon. So if it criticises him in that regard, it's very difficult to see him carrying on, I think.
I think the passage of time is very, very important in all of this. This time last week, I thought it was going to come out, this report, on Thursday, and that would have been quite dramatic, the day after Prime Minister's questions. But now they're talking about next week. Well, next week could be the end of next week, and it might even slip into the week after. But supposing it pops out on Friday, for example, when all the members of Parliament are back in their constituencies. Let's face it, these rebels are pretty poorly organised. They appear to be different factions. There's no central control. They basically scurried under the skirting boards now. There's none of them around to be interviewed. So if they are in their constituencies and they're having to communicate by WhatsApp while they're doing their constituency duties, I don't see them getting together particularly. And what's it going to tell us? Is it going to tell us anything that we don't know? I just have a feeling that the anger that was present last weekend has dissipated by this weekend, will be less again by next weekend. I think it would be quite hard for them to say, I was waiting for this particular detail. OK, that 40 people left Downing Street at 1 in the morning on the morning of the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral. That may emerge. That would be a terrible thing, although it doesn't implicate the Prime Minister directly. I don't think they're going to have the knockout blow in this report.
Well, I have noticed just this last week as well, there has been more conversations about, there was a party, but what about what's happening in Russia? What about the cost of living crisis? What about the security of our energy and the cost of our energy? People are moving on. And I think you're right on that, Michael. But it will be, of course, there'll be a feeding frenzy when the report comes out, Paul, because everybody will be wanting to see what's there.
I mean, I think you're right to a certain degree that there are much bigger things at play out there in the big wide world, which focuses the minds of the public. But I also think it's true that the electorate hate hypocrisy.
Oh, they do.
They hate hypocrisy and they hate impropriety, and they feel that if they are making sacrifices, regardless of whether or not you think, as I said, the restrictions were legitimate, if they are making sacrifices and they see their leaders saying one thing and doing another, that does anger people. And although you may be right, Michael, in terms of the anger amongst Tory MPs dissipating, But whether it will among the public, I mean, as I understand, Tory MPs, their inboxes are overfilled with angry constituents. And when the report comes out, that may happen again. So they may be subject to that pressure from their constituents, possibly.
These MPs are having to calculate something which is incalculable, which is what will be the degree of anger in 2.5 years' time when there might be a general election. Now, I think what I'm saying is that whereas last weekend they probably thought there's no way that Boris will be forgiven for this, even in 2.5 years' time, therefore we should get rid of him. With the passage of time, they might think, my goodness, if tempers have cooled that much in 1 week, how much might they have cooled in 2.5 years? I mean, really, will people remember this very vividly?
You're not suggesting that Tory MPs would place opportunism over principle, surely?
Of course I am. This whole thing is about their seats. We all know that. And in a way, so it should be. It's all about winning the respect and support of the public. But the second half of their decision is, whatever conclusion they reach about what people may think about Boris in 2.5 years, do they think Rishi Sunak, Jeremy Hunt, Liz Truss is a better bet? I mean, that is a fantastic gamble to take. And I think if I still were a Tory MP, which is hard for me to imagine, I probably wouldn't take the gamble.
Yeah. Well, coming up on the political correction, as Vladimir Putin moves troops to the Ukrainian border, we're asking if diplomacy with Russia is possible.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world. If
you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to half. GBNews.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United
Well, you've been flooding us with your views. Arlene.
So we're both putting on our glasses now, and there was a little bit of Twitter action last week about your glasses, so I thought I'd wear mine this week as well. So Chris is saying, regarding the minister forced from her role, I'm very disappointed that this lady has cause to raise this. My first instinct, however, is that other factors are more likely, as the religion of Islam has not held Sajid Javid back in the Tory party.
And Karen says, I think the allegations are a lie, but she has herself on the front page of the papers.
Not much sympathy for her so far. On that point, Sajid Javid, I was just looking this up, actually. Sajid Javid is from a Muslim background. He's not a practicing Muslim. Both his parents are Muslims, although I think the point might well hold.
Sure.
And Trevor says there seem to be a few MPs trying to rock the boat. If this were true, why are there two Muslims in the cabinet? Well, I don't know the religions of people, actually, so I don't know whether that's
Nadeem
the
Zahawi.
case or not.
Nadeem, of course, yeah. Phil says, if this allegation is found to be untrue, will the above lady face disciplinary measures for false allegations, or will redress of her accusation be viewed as racism?
And Mel says she was an appointee of Theresa May, and look at her voting record against the government on COVID measures, and the answer can be found.
And Andy says, why has it taken so long for her to report? And should we just have a couple of views on the parties and Partygate and so on?
Yes, so Adrian is saying, of course, Winston changed parties twice. And to paraphrase, anyone can rat, but to double rat.
And Alan says, voting for a party and not a candidate is not good for democracy.
And Alison says, very plainly, all who attended parties should be sacked. Well, just before we turn to the Russia issue, in the northeast of England, there's an industrial boost on the way with a government investment programme of £100 million to facilitate the mass production of electric car batteries with British Volt, which is based in Blythe in Northumberland. It's set to be Britain's first large-scale gigafactory, expecting to generate 5,000 new jobs.
Boris Johnson said of the news, British Volt's plan to build a new gigafactory in Northumberland is a strong testament to the skilled workers of the North East and the UK's place at the helm of the global green industrial revolution. So with the explosion of demand for new green technology, levelling up and fresh trade deals, is post-Brexit Britain seeing a re-industrial revolution? Now, Paul, I know this is one that you were very interested in.
Yeah, and it's good news because I think communities like Blythe in Northumberland, other post-industrial communities, need these kind of solid blue-collar jobs, which once upon a time were there in abundance, but as a result of deindustrialisation, thousands of those jobs have vanished overseas. So it's good to see them coming back because they are, in many respects, I think, those solid blue-collar jobs, the lifeblood of local communities. And I think, you know, this needs to be part, in my view, of a wider industrial strategy, particularly in the post-Brexit world, or in the Brexit world, I should say. Arguably, we could not have done this within the European Union. We know that the European Union has very strict state aid rules to ensure a level playing field. One of my big bugbears as someone on the left who supported Brexit is the way in which EU restrictions prevent us from subsidising manufacturing, investing because of those level playing field rules. So it's good, it's positive. These manufacturing jobs, as I say, are often the backbone, or were once upon a time, of those communities. It's good to see them return, but we need more. We need more of this type of thing.
Well, as well as that, I mean, it's good to see people talk about green jobs, and there should be more green jobs coming as a sort of a balance to the argument about cutting some of the manufacturing. So it's good to see those coming online, and to the North East as well, of course.
I have seen extraordinary things on my travels with a camera.
Yeah.
Mainly in the green energy space, but for example, turbines, wind turbines. You cannot believe the size of these things that are being manufactured in Britain. I mean, the blades are the length of a football pitch, and they then stand on a tower, which obviously has to be correspondingly big. And these things are being churned out in hundreds, and then they're towed off, a long way offshore. So this is pretty large-scale stuff. And I think wind energy is only the beginning of it because, it's famously unreliable. But wave energy and tidal energy are much more reliable. And again, we could well be in the forefront of some of these developments. The one thing that bothers me, of course, is how the story began, which was a £100 million investment by the government. In other words, are these things viable on their own? Because, of course, all of green energy at the moment is hugely subsidised. And we know that because it comes back into our bills, and we know that that is now going to be a huge part of the cost of living problem. So are these industries viable on their own? I imagine, Paul, that you would be perfectly happy to see pump priming. In other words, that the money's there at the beginning, but that it is not left there in the long term.
Well, certainly pump priming, I think, is important because arguably some of these projects just wouldn't get off the ground without government intervention. And I do believe that the government should play an active role in the manufacturing sector in helping us to reindustrialise. I think there is huge talent in this country for this type of thing, but I think we've focused so much over recent years on the importance of the city, on the importance of finance capital, and we've really kind of ignored the demands of the real economy, the productive sector, where goods are made and wealth is produced. There's all sorts of reasons for that. We don't invest enough. We don't invest enough because we're not particularly competitive. Because we don't invest enough, productivity is retarded. So there are all sorts of macroeconomic questions, I think, that need to go into this debate. But ultimately, get these things off the ground, secure those jobs, and I'm sure this will be a success, and we need to see more like it.
One of the things I found interesting is it's not just, as it were, shipyards or brownfield sites that are becoming manufacturing places for turbines and so on. A place like Grimsby, which obviously lost all its fishing due to the European Union and the Cod Wars. Grimsby is now heavily involved in the maintenance of these turbines. So there's a whole new industry going into an old fishing port, which is really very, very encouraging indeed. By the way, these are jobs that people will not be able to do from home. They jolly well need to turn up and do them.
Well, there we go.
No, I think this is good news. It is good news, and it's good to see those type of jobs being brought about. But I did a piece on my Friday show recently about the ethical part of this, which is about where they mine the cobalt and the lithium for these batteries. Obviously, we need to have batteries to have the storage in terms of renewable energy, but there are some quite awful horror stories about children working in the DRC, for example, in getting the cobalt out. So we had talked at one stage about the ethical policies of some of these companies, and obviously this is one that I hope that British companies will take into consideration when they are getting that source.
It's an effect of the new global market.
Sure.
That big corporations are exploiting some of those poorer countries in terms of their resources, in terms of exploiting the labour force and not giving people decent working conditions, in terms of exploiting the environment. And that can only be tackled, I think, on a global scale because, as I say, it is a manifestation of globalisation itself.
Sure.
And, of course, we should not be profiting on the backs of the exploitation of poorer countries. That is rule one as far as I'm concerned.
Neither do we want, China or Russia to blackmail us if they have the supplies.
No, well, that is absolutely right. I mean, I take the view that we should be helping the government of the DRC to deal with the issue rather than just ignoring it and saying we can't do anything there. But, Michael, you also have a story involving the government's COVID loan scheme, quite shocking figures.
Well, yes. I saw a story in the Financial Times this week. There was a case of a man who'd been given a £50,000 loan by the government, supposedly to prop up his business that had been damaged by COVID. It turned out this was a fellow who had, I think, 48 convictions. And the judge in the case said, how has it been possible for the government to give a £48,000 loan to someone with a very long criminal record? Now, I rather fear that this is only the tip of the iceberg. About £47 billion has been paid out in loans. This programme was applauded, but how well has it been administered? One estimate is that about 1/3 of these loans will not be recovered. That is not to say they're all fraudulent, but they won't be recovered one way or another. Quite a large proportion are thought to have been the result of fraud. The information I'm getting is that really the government had deployed no anti-fraud resources in this. I mean, there are anti-fraud experts. There are people who can smell fraud at a distance, but they were not employed. So civil servants were out there pushing the money out of the door in this most remarkable case of all, giving it to someone with a long criminal record. By the way, in the case that's mentioned that was in court last week, there were 2 people who'd actually received loans with criminal records. I think this is a very big scandal. And just to give you an idea of the size of money we're talking about, so a penny on income tax raises $5.5 billion. So if a third of these loans are unrecoverable, let's call that about 17 billion, that's equivalent to 3 pence on income tax. And members of Parliament will be saying, why are we having a national insurance rise when the government is wasting such huge sums of money? Does this make you as indignant as I am?
Well, I mean, we have to look as well at the cases that we don't necessarily know about, the ones that have slipped through the net and we may never know about. Now, of course, we were at the beginning of a pandemic when these loans the loan facility was put into place. And there were all sorts of competing priorities for the government at the time. But it strikes me that that's not really an excuse when you are talking about billions and billions of pounds of taxpayers' money. I do not believe it was beyond the capability of government to get proper governance procedures in place and auditing procedures in place to make sure that those applying for the loans and receiving them were above board. Because, as I say, this is money that people have worked hard and paid through the exchequer out of their taxes. So I think you're right to be indignant because it is a genuine scandal.
Hey, you know that warm feeling you get when you help someone in need?
SOS Emotional Health Charity needs volunteers like you to support people who are struggling with their feelings.
If you're compassionate and over 18 and have got a little free time, you can join SOS.
As a phone or email support volunteer, giving kindness and time.
Training, ongoing development and support will be provided.
Apply to join the SOS family today and turn your spare minutes into another person's lifeline.
Building a business is all about ambition, but sometimes getting access to the right funding can slow you down. At V4B Business Finance, we work with the businesses of Britain, turning big plans into reality, forging relationships, getting to know you and your goals. We search the market to match you to the right lender, helping you grow. V4B Business Finance, hassle-free funding, fueling your ambition.
My word, Money Super 7, that was a close one. But you two were in and out of there in no time. And you saved Sarah an impressive £327 on a new credit card.
The Money Super 7, helping Britain save on credit cards and so much more. Super Save with Money Supermarket.
Dry or chesty cough? Wondering what type of cough you have? Try BronchoStop. BronchoStop is used to relieve dry and chesty coughs. BronchoStop, to relieve any cough.
Looking for competitively priced gold and silver? Look no further than the Gold Bullion Company. We stock gold and silver bullion bars and coins from leading mints in the UK and around the world, with pricing based on the live market rate. Our gold coins and bars are all VAT free, with a choice of fully insured storage or free fully insured UK delivery and over 9,000 5-star reviews. You know that you're in safe hands. Visit thegoldbullion.co.uk to find out more.
Russia has denied claims that it is planning an invasion of Ukraine, despite having moved 100,000 of its troops to the border.
The international community has condemned the move, with Foreign Secretary Liz Truss had this warning to Russia.
They claim they want stability while they work to threaten and destabilise others. We know what lies down that path and the terrible toll in lives lost and human suffering it brings. That's why we urge President Putin to desist and step back from Ukraine before he makes a massive strategic mistake.
Earlier this week, the United States' Secretary of State Antony Blinken said if Russian military forces move across Ukraine's border, it will be met with a swift, severe and united response. Well, let's hope that that would be the case, but I wonder whether Vladimir Putin hasn't already achieved quite a lot of what he wanted. I'm very struck by this article in The Telegraph today. The EU's deafening silence on Russian aggression makes war more likely. Now, that is written by Tom Tugendhat, MP, who is the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, who was a Remainer, of course. But the point that he is making is that because Germany appears to have been blackmailed by receiving gas supplies from Russia and is opposing even the onward sale of NATO weapons to Ukraine, because France seems determined to strike a distinctive posture from the United States, whatever that might be, he thinks that this hesitancy has actually made war more likely. I'm not sure about that, but what I would say is that Vladimir Putin must be absolutely delighted to see the NATO allies striking different postures, and many of them pretty unimpressive. That's without even talking about President Biden's terrible gaffe the other day when he appeared to suggest that an incursion would be tolerated.
Well, I think it was a minor incursion, but then what does that mean? Does that mean you only come in at 20 miles, 30 miles, take over one city, two cities? It was a dreadful statement. And then his own spokespeople spent the whole of the rest of the week trying to backpedal from what that meant. And Anthony Blinken, as you know, was over in Geneva having those talks with the Russians. And I understand Ben Wallace is going to continue with that. And actually, I think Ben Wallace has been a very good defence secretary in everything that he has been doing around Russia. How do you think our own government has reacted?
Well, I think there's a mainstream narrative here which is slightly concerning, which depicts Putin, who is unquestionably a tyrant, but in this situation as the would-be aggressor, champing at the bit to invade Ukraine, and NATO and the West, the US and the UK, as the good guys. But I think there's an argument to say that in many cases, what Putin has been doing is reacting to what he sees as a threat. You know, the sort of relentless expansion of NATO eastwards, Ukraine obviously on the border of Russia, NATO manoeuvres in the Black Sea and in Western Ukraine, the Ukrainian government being armed by the UK and the US. I just wonder if, for example, if America found that Russian missiles were being based in Mexico. Look back to Cuba, for example, in 1962, when Soviet missiles, the plan was to locate Soviet missiles on Cuba. The Americans probably understandably went mad because they saw it as a threat. So yes, of course, countries are sovereign, but countries are not islands in the metaphorical sense. You know, there's a huge geopolitical game being played, and I fear that we're stoking up the situation unnecessarily.
I don't know whether your analogy with Cuba is exact, but would you, if you were making NATO foreign policy, would you accept a Russian sphere of influence that covered Ukraine?
Well, I don't think it's a question of whether you accept it. I think that it's a geopolitical reality, Michael. You know, we live in a world where countries like Russia and China and the US will try to exert force, whether economic or military, beyond their own borders. Now, we're not in a Cold War. The modern-day Russia has no power, in my view, nothing like the power of the old Soviet Union. It's conceded enormous amounts of territory over the last kind of 30 years. And it seems to me almost as if we're creating an enemy unnecessarily. And that's not, as I say, to downplay the tyranny of the Russian regime. But we were told, for example, when Trump was elected that Russia was behind it. Turned out that was nonsense. When we voted for Brexit, we were told Russia was behind it. Turns out it was nonsense. I suspect that this suggestion that they're about to invade Ukraine will turn out to be nonsense as well.
Well, we're now joined by Valery Morozov. He's a former Kremlin whistleblower and he's now a Russian analyst. Of course, we want to hear what you have to say, Valery. We're talking about this discussion, but what way do you read what's happening at the moment?
I think that what is going on, especially around Ukraine, is the cover-up of the really important negotiations and talks which are going inside, deep, mainly between the United States, Russia, and maybe China. And China, not maybe India. At least Putin wants India to be involved. And of course, in any case, in the nearest future, there will be no invasion unless Putin is forced, by different circumstances. But let us just take, say, for example, 100,000 troops, which are a lot of noise and a lot of talks is going on. Actually, the length of the Russian-Ukrainian border is 200 nearly 2,500 kilometers. That is approximately from Moscow to London.
Yeah.
Also, it is included the Belarusian-Ukrainian border. It is 1,100 kilometers. This is from London or Moscow to Berlin. On this length, you are saying that there is 100,000 troops. That is in the depth of 400 kilometers. That is calculated inside Russian territory. That is 20 soldiers per 1 kilometer of the border, or 400 square kilometers of the Russian territory. 10 soldiers.
You make the point well, but presumably the operation would not be to take over all of Ukraine. I believe Ukraine is the second largest country in Europe after Russia. It would be an operation of the sort we've already seen. We've seen Crimea go, we've seen Donbass go to Russian-backed forces. It would be an incursion of that sort. But are you saying they're simply not going to do it? I can imagine that they would get very badly bogged down in a war against such a large country, and a country where I think quite a lot of people are determined to maintain their independence. So I can see that the prospect of such a war
we have to look at the facts. You know, last year, the trade turnover between Russia and Ukraine increased by approximately 70%, including fuel, petrol, diesel. That is what is coming to Ukraine. And that is what is used by the Ukrainian army, by Ukrainian civilians, their private cars and all those things. Russia is exporting electricity through Belarus. Russia is one of the main, and Belarus are one of the main partners, trade partners, and it is increased. Say, for example, the same fuel, there's more than 80% increased in the last year. What is the purpose of invading if you can stop simply supplying electricity and fuel? In Ukraine now, it is from -5 to -20. Just imagine if Putin decides to stop it.
Sure.
There will be, the living standard in Ukraine is 3 times lower than in Russia. A lot of opposition.
Tell us about this global idea that Putin has to involve the United States, Russia, China, and maybe India. What is the settlement that he wants to see?
I think it is not even Putin. Putin is reacting. I think this is the idea of Biden. At least the initiative was from Biden. And for the first time when they met in Geneva, I think they discussed it. Actually, this is new architecture of international relations. And on the top of this architecture, there will be at least three, the United States, Russia, and China. Putin went to India. They signed a huge agreement with India. And now there is a big game, a great game. Who will be, how it will be distributed, how the world will be, where it will be, Europe also. Of course, the problem with Europe is that it has no military power, and compared to Russia or the United States.
Valery, would there be support in Russia among the people, the citizens, for any invasion of Ukraine?
No. And there is no support in Kremlin, and there is no idea. Russians understand that Ukraine is going to collapse by itself, economically and politically. And time is playing for Russians. And Putin just wants a certain moment, how he'll use his, all these levers to speed up the collapse or take over control, but he will not take over control by military invasion. That will be the last result. Actually, you should understand from the beginning, the collapse of the Soviet Union was initiated by Russia. And that is the only one party which was for this. And in 1947, the people who were actually the closed allies of, and not supporters, but favorites of Stalin were arrested and executed. And the criminal case at that time was called the Russian case. It was the first attempt after the war to stop donating by Russia, to stop donating these republics, and let them go separately or whatever. That was the idea. Sort of Finlandization. At that time, Stalin arrested, executed, including Kuznetsov, for example, who was, or it was called also Leningrad Group. They were coming from, with the war. They were leaders during the war of the Leningrad and the Leningrad siege, very popular, heroic people. But they were arrested and executed. So these ideas were developing still in Russia. And that was the ideas which came in beginning of 1980s. I knew these people who were behind this.
Coming to today, do you think that NATO, the United States, can accept something that Putin will put on the table, his idea of a new global arrangement?
I think yes, because that is the whole purpose of this talk around Ukraine, because actually Russia is not asking for Ukraine. Russia is asking to take out the bases from the Eastern Europe, not Ukraine. Russia is asking to take the United States to remove nuclear weapons from Europe. It has nothing to do with Ukraine. These were the main demands of Putin now. But the talk actually is only about Ukraine, where Putin doesn't want to invade. He doesn't want to get problems.
Rather backing up Paul's point that we need to look at what NATO and the United States have been doing as well. But I think it will be very, very difficult for the United States to accept an idea of spheres of influence, which I think is probably implicit in the Putin grand plan that you describe.
Yeah, and I mean, it's really good to have your take on it, Valerie, as well, because we've been hearing a lot about Putin and what he's thinking and wanting to go back to 1917 Russia and all of these sorts of things. So thank you so much for coming in and giving us your perspective. Thank you. Thank you.
Arlene, why has a small Irish town hit the headlines this week?
Well, this is quite an incredible story. And of course, we do have to remember that there's a deceased in this story. But apparently, two individuals took a corpse. And we're not sure whether the man was already dead or whether he died when he went into the post office to claim pension. Now, you'd have to be pretty desperate to get the pension, to bring a dead man in to claim his pension. And apparently there were only allowed 3 people in the post office at the time due to COVID restrictions. And the Sunday Telegraph has quite an amusing editorial which says that is some civic commitment in keeping the COVID regulations even when you're dead. But I have to say, in Northern Ireland, as you know, sometimes we make the joke that even the dead can vote. But here we have a dead man being brought into a post office to claim his pension.
Well, only in Ireland.
Only in Ireland.
As you say, we need to remember that the poor soul is dead, but it seems incredible. It struck me of the old 40 Towers episode, The Kipper and the Corpse, where one of the guests died and they've got him plonked up on a chair in the lobby and pretending that he's still alive. But what sort of mindset would do? I mean, were they drunk or something? Why would anyone even conceive of taking a dead body into a post office?
But it's how they thought they could get away with it, Paul. That's the incredible thing that I can't understand.
Yeah, they're not heard of remote working in the internet.
No, obviously not. Anyway, now on to another serious topic. The Justice Secretary, Dominic Raab, has given magistrates tougher sentencing powers in a bid to reduce a backlog of cases clogging the Crown Courts.
The reform, which will come into effect within months, doubles the maximum prison sentence that can be handed down in a magistrate's court in England and Wales from 6 months to 1 year. Now, as I understand it, the defendant will still have the right to elect to go to jury trial, but there will be a broader range of cases that can be heard by magistrates. Therefore, the overall effect will be that there will be fewer jury trials. I looked this up the other day. The concept of trial by jury goes back to 1215, which is the year of Magna Carta, and it's mentioned in Magna Carta, although apparently it was an edict of Pope Innocent III that brought it in. But nonetheless, Magna Carta has cemented the jury, not only in English law, but also, by the way, in American law. It's regarded as something, virtually untouchable and sacred. Here's Dominic Raab proposing a change, and I would just like to throw into the mix whether the jury is fit for purpose today. I mean, I tremble if I get a jury summons because I don't want my life to be disrupted. I tremble also because if I were on a long fraud case, would I be able to make a reasonable judgment? Would I be able to follow the evidence? would I, having sat there for months, find that two of the jurors had died and the whole trial was called off? It's quite a delicate, quite a flimsy system. And whilst I understand what was being defended in 1215, we were defending against arbitrary government by the king. Against what are we being defended in 2022? What does the jury trial defend us against, I wonder?
Well, I guess we may never know, but there's the potential that any state, any political actors will try to cook up particular charges against an individual and pursue a political prosecution or persecution of that individual because of his or her views, his or her activities. And, the truth is that the jury system, where people are tried not by the state, not by state actors, but by an independent jury of their peers, is crucial, I think, in acting as a bulwark against that.
Hello there, I'm Eamon.
And I'm Isabel.
And you're watching the GB News digital stream across the United Kingdom.
And around the world.
If you're here in the UK, you can also watch us on your TV screen. GB News is Freeview channel 236.
On Sky, we're channel 515.
626 on Virgin Media.
Just remember, you might need to retune your TV to watch the channel.
Yeah, and if you are doing that, find out more about retuning by going to gbnews.uk.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then